Losers, boozers and jacuzzi users, and thank you for joining me in what is frankly an extravagantly crackpot but I hope tremendously enjoyable adventure into sound. This 12 inches of glossy groove and dark promise is one of the most exciting creations in the history of carefree human gyration. It's an LP, of course, a pop LP. Tonight I'll be joined by a group of hop-bopping, finger-popping sound scientists to hash around the pop music and end up with a smorgasbord of 12 selected LPs that are pure pop for now people. Well, now and then. Whatever the era, this is about the pop, that was heard around the world. Pop music. You know, one of the best pieces of pop music ever was about pop music, and it was called Pop Music by M. It included the genius couplet, "Want to be a gunslinger, don't be a rock singer. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo will get you where you want to go. Suck it up, Black Flag." And taking us to the toppermost of the poppermost tonight, we have writer, novelist and doyenne of all the leading waspish salons, that's Grace Dent. Over there, actual top-tier pop royalty. He wrote Karma Chameleon, you know. Maybe you've heard of him. There's Boy George. And not least, the man who launched Mojo, Empire and Q magazines, and most importantly, smash hits, David Hepworth. I'm going to ask you, as a settler, the first pop album you bought with your own money. Grace?
Pop album with my own money would be Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, Frankie. Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Yeah.
George?
Yeah.
T-Rex Tanks.
Yeah, you and I both. What a piece of work. David?
With the Beatles, by the Beatles.
There you go. OK, and there you can carbon date the ages of everybody on board. Now, tradition dictates pop spins at 45 RPM and lasts no longer than 3 minutes, 1 second. Up until the mid-60s, that was all the recipe required. But then things started to get interesting and pop vinyl, like pop mines, began expanding. Pop. Pop. The perfect word for a short burst of excitement. Singles have historically been pop's weapon of choice. But from the mid-60s to the 80s, some pop artists wanted a larger canvas. They needed the album.
In the wee small hours.
In 1955, Frank Sinatra released In the Wee Small Hours, a collection of ballads for lost love Ava Gardner. It was probably the first ever concept album and hinted at the creative possibilities of the long player. But not everyone could grow from 45 to 33. Not everyone had vision. Not everyone was any good. What, say, the Barron Knights lacked, Brian Wilson had in bucket loads. The Beach Boys' 1966 album Pet Sounds was constructed as a complete work, designed to serve different emotions than their zippy 45s. After the Beach Boys showed how it could be done, simple, giddy, slapdash pop LPs became, well, more brainy. Money, time, creativity, possibly drugs, were lavished on cutting an album. Peppy, improved record players, and teenagers with lots of spare cash didn't hurt either. By 1968, album sales had even outstripped that of the single. It was the beginning of the 33 1/3 revolution, a golden age when the pop album was fun, wildly creative, and the repository of a new booming culture's dreams and emotions. David, earlier you said your first pop album you bought with your own money was the second Beatles album. Was that the beginning of it? When did you first think the pop album, which is a difficult concept, had legs?
I suppose about 1965, I suppose, when the Beatles had repeatedly made albums where they'd written all the songs, I suppose, you know, which was a concept unknown in the 1950s. You know, you got an album, an Elvis Presley album, you never expected it to be any good. It would have 2 hits and then a bunch of pot boilers. And then the standards changed in the mid-60s, and I suppose Bob Dylan at the same time, Highway 61, all these kind of things. And they suddenly started becoming really sustained, and people would play them and play them and play them and never get bored.
Yeah, but the difference there, I think, between, say, Dylan and the Beatles thing, I mean, the rock album went a different way. I always think it's a trickier concept, and there are fewer and further between actual pop albums. It's almost an oxymoron because they should be singles. George, was it the albums you first started buying and playing every track? What would they have been? Pop and T-Rex.
Well, the first real important album for me was The Man Who Sold the World, which I inherited from my older brother, who I think just found it a bit weird. You know, I remember hearing it through the bedroom door.
It is a weird album.
Yeah. I want this. What's this record? What's this record? I didn't know anything about Bowie at that point, and I think my brother very quickly kind of went off it and moved on to sort of The Faces or Alice Cooper, and I got the album. And that album was like a life-changing record for me. Because
How? When you say that, people say that, maybe the younger folk will think, how can an album, if they know what one is, be life-changing? What do you mean?
When you're like sort of 11 and you hear he swallowed his pride and puckered his lips and showed me the leather bolt round his hips.
Yeah.
He screamed and hollered Cahill Gabriel. I was like, what is this?
He smelled the burning pit of fear, I believe, as well.
You know, everything, you know, pop music, Chubby Chubby Cheap Cheap, The Sweet, all those sort of pop records. And suddenly Bowie was painting this kind of very interesting kind of landscape, which I'd never heard.
Yeah,
you know, never.
And yet, pop in itself, as I say, is separate from rock. A pop album, and Grace, it's the same. I hesitate to use the word journey that every teenager goes on. You think there's never been anything like this. This is about me and stuff.
Well, you're talking about life changing, and the album I was going to mention with that was Parallel Lines by Blondie, and I was pre-teen when I heard that, but like just that striking image. She's on the cover, flanked by men, and if you look at the personnel, like, and if you look who was working on that album, she's pretty much the only woman. And that whole album's just full of these strong songs about, you know, her taking control in relationships and kind of having a bit, you know, things like Sunday Girl, she's kind of having a bit of a laugh about drippy women and things like that. And then, you know, that did as you know, as like an 8, 9, 10-year-old girl, I thought, it's out there. It's out there.
It wouldn't have been no good, though, without the tunes, would it? I mean, you could do it as a screen.
Fantastic. But I mean, there is single after single after single.
It's everything. I don't think you can ever separate a great artist from what they wear, how they wear it, how they walk. You know, it's all encompassing, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
Because when we talk about the X Factor, that idea that we have now, the X Factor, we don't really see that, whereas that was what we were seeing.
I hesitate to be the first person to use the expression, the thing that you can't tell kids today, but in the golden age of the album, you had no other entertainment.
No.
Nothing.
You know, if you were a teenager or young 20s or whatever, you went home every night and you went in your bedroom and you listened to these records again and again.
And even in the 70s, there was only one TV show once a week.
Yeah.
That you could watch music on, and I think life was better for it.
And you couldn't even watch it without like a chorus of disapproval behind you from your family.
Or if I'd upset my father
just in there,
and couldn't watch it, that was like the end of life. You know, if I'd upset Dad.
So the album, the actual album, and we'll go into the cover and everything else later on, it was almost like a narcotic and a secret, even though they were selling hundreds of thousands. The one that you owned was the one that mattered.
And also, you know, it's stuff that like my mother would hear the records I was playing and say that isn't music.
Yes.
So there would be, you know, it was your secret thing that you took to your bedroom and listened to over and over. And nobody could understand why you were listening to it.
Yeah.
And any extra content you could find on it, because you were so bored, you would go through everything on the back. You would read everything. You would look for play-out messages. It would be, you know.
But the pop album was as different from the folk album, jazz album, reggae album, whatever. They were something that just you put on when you needed not to think about stuff as well. I mean, you had all the different albums, your serious albums, but the pop album, as I say, is a hard thing to carry off because, by definition, it just has to keep the hits coming over two sides. Did you keep your pop albums? Did they have a special place for anyone here that you actually thought, all I want to do is just put this on and kick back?
I've always been really disrespectful of vinyl that I owned, and I know this is going to annoy you men, but you know, there was no system, there was no order. A lot of things didn't even get put back in sleeves.
Yeah.
Look at that. There you go.
Well, do you know what? That hollow,
jam, mascara.
That hollow laugh you just heard from South London was you suggesting that I have order in my system. That was my wife just
I think
coming
for me
aboard
as a kid, there was no discretion. It was like I could listen to, you know, Man Who Sold the World, listen to the Irish rebel songs, listen to show bands, listen to jazz.
You've got a theory about why we call it even pop music, haven't you?
Well, the most winning theory for why you call it pop music, I picked up recently watching a film called The Wrecking Crew, which is about the great studio musicians of Los Angeles in the 60s. And Carol Kay, she talks about making a tune pop. And the job of a session musician was to make a tune pop, make it work in a way that leapt off the record. And I think that's far more winning a definition than talking about popular and so forth. But I think all these categories, have been increasingly slavishly, adhered to recently. I think category names are good servants and very bad masters, and I think there's great danger nowadays. People say, you show a kid a picture of a band and they can tell you what it's going to sound like.
Yeah,
because everybody dresses like their sound nowadays. Whereas I bought the Monkees, I'm a Believer, on the same day as I bought Jimi Hendrix's Hey Joe, It's the same world.
Well, I tell you, I'm going to make selections for what we're calling in Phil Spector's absence the wall of sound behind us, although you'll notice it doesn't make a noise. I'll be peppering the show with ones I'm going to put up there at the end of the show. I'm going to ask you to suggest 3 to complete it. And the first one I'm going to put up could only happen with a pop album. I don't trust best-ofs and greatest hits by rock stars or opera singers or anything else, but pop music can do that. And one of the greatest will be straight away T-Rex Greatest Hits. There's all killer, no filler, and even the B-sides on here, Jet the Bug Love, songs like this are all terrific. So the first one for the Wall of Sound, inevitably, everyone's got to live up to T-Rex Greatest Hits, sitting on a real tiger, I'll bet. In some ways, the pop LP requires more work than any other genre. You can't just put out your product in an old sock and shuffle away. We punters wanted the whole package, and you got to sell, sell, sell. Pop, it's the gateway drug before we start with the harder stuff. It starts with singles, and if you're not careful, it ends up with double albums. It's the pop style that hooks us. Their album, the sound, the sleeve, and yes, the smell will give us even more of what we really, really wanted, to be part of something global, yet somehow still secret. Oh, Ronnie Roddy Spector, beautiful, talented, bad girl of the Ronettes, reducing her bandmates to mere luggage. This was Phil Spector in full flood and before the fall. Just one of the Ronettes' magnificent songs seemed to be an album of emotions in itself. Or as Phil said, a little symphony for the kids. T-Rex, pop at its best. How can something so shallow hit so deep? In 1971, on Top of the Pops, Mark Bolan went from gently toking on Tolkien to Little Richard Reborn simply by making up his face. The girls love Bolan. You can't fake what Scylla's putting out there. And the boys suddenly found their feminine sides to be fun. Market traders silently blessed him as they flogged glittery loon pants by the truckload. And now you can't hold me forever. But it was Mark's pal Elton, briefly a fellow foot soldier in the glam rock army, who graduated not just to ever more flamboyant stage clothes, but to even greater songwriting success with Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Here was that rarest of vinyl creatures, a double album that worked. Sweet mother of mercy, this is a great pop record, and from a powerhouse album. Madonna, bringing aboard Nile Rodgers from Chic to produce, created a diamond-encrusted bear trap of a sound, and it is the sound. That same snaky narcotic that winds through generations of popular hits like a platinum thread. George, I suspect we're heading towards inevitably David Bowie here, but what was the first album where you thought, oh, it's a lifestyle too. There's more to this than just a bunch of tunes on an album.
I think, from the moment I discovered Bowie through my older brother, it was the sense of kind of not being alone, not sort of being the only person in the world that was a bit odd. Because when you're a kid, when you're gay and you're a kid in suburbia, other kids point out that there's something odd about you. You don't know there's anything odd about you at all. You don't think it's weird that you're hanging out with girls and singing on the doorstep. You get told you're different and you get made to feel different. So when I discovered Bowie and Mark Bolan, it was the sense of, oh, there's other people that might be a bit like me. Yeah. Without having a real understanding of what it is that was entirely wrong with you.
And why couldn't that arrive at you then from any other way? I mean, would you have known it? Could you have got it from books or films or anything else?
Possibly, and I know that people do. I mean, alternatively, I remember my brother's friend Barry, who was a Status Quo fan. I mean, I fell in love with him and listened to Paper Plane.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was just music was a kind of fantasy realm. It was out of reach. Yeah. Whereas nowadays it's everywhere.
Yes, it is.
Lift up your
culture.
shoe and someone's doing a gig. But then it was like, you know, it was so out of your reach and so otherworldly.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It took that jump, though, from you know, being a happy-go-lucky pop picker and buying singles to suddenly thinking, no, I'm into this. I want the albums. I want to buy into what this person is putting out. Who was it for you, Grace, that you actually thought, yeah, I'll look like that, dress like that, follow that? Was there anyone?
I didn't want to look and dress like that, but completely infatuated with Adam Ant.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I've got an older brother who's 10 years older than me, and so Dirk Wears White Socks was in the house, the album, and then Kings of the Wild Frontier. But by the time it turned into the Prince Charming part, I think that was when, well, the nation was in love with him. You know, the whole kind of all that. Well, we all know what I mean.
Yes, we all exactly. You just do that.
I think by that point, because I mean, I was a young girl, and he is incredibly beautiful. And beautiful, but also very female. So it was all kind of a bit confusing. And also, I mean, from early on, you could see that, you know, he wasn't, as you say, you know, I always knew that I wasn't entirely normal in Curragh and Carlisle, and he was.
What do you mean by that?
Weirdo.
Because you know, George's it's sexuality and that otherness. What do you mean?
I wanted
the pop was
out.
helping you with what?
I wanted out. From when I was that big, I wanted out of Carlisle. I love Carlisle. It's a lovely place, but I wanted to be here. I wanted to be sitting on this seat.
And where did you think? Where did you think the pop world was then? Where did you think that was? This
it was
pop
in
LP,
London
where's
where
that?
Smash Hits was.
Well. There you go.
Yeah,
So
I wanted
meant
to be.
freedom,
I wanted
didn't
to
it?
be
It's
chatting to
freedom.
him.
It
and
is,
sitting
it
with
is.
him.
Bohemian lifestyle, the bohemian lifestyle. I always imagine like Bowie, like eating space food and getting visits from Steve Priest from the suite, bringing him gifts.
Whereas in fact,
it was quite biblical, you know.
Whereas in
my
fact,
mind.
I was so shocked when I found out he wrote Life on Mars on a bus going to Lewisham to buy a shirt. He didn't do things like that. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yes
Of course
he did.
not. You know, somebody said to me the other day, your lifestyle's not very rock and roll, because I was talking about something I cooked. And I was like, that's a myth.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to kind of, encourage the myth sometimes, you know.
David, have you ever been a slavish follower, absolutely consumed by what a pop album was offering?
I remember as I in my later teens, you know, the people like Bob Dylan and Paul Simon, and suddenly, you know, I was in the sixth form and so forth. I was not extraordinary. I was really normal, straight down the line. But I wanted to pursue this interest in pop music as I got older. And the thing that was happening at the time, 66, 67, 68, was the music seemed to be getting slightly older, and it seemed to be about things. And so you could sell it to yourself as being partly an education. And it's no exaggeration to say I learnt a huge amount about the world and American history from the records of Paul Simon.
Yeah.
Those albums. You
But
know
see,
what I mean?
now people can't even compute Paul Simon as pop. They would say, oh, Paul Simon is a poet and he's a legend and he's this monolith. But actually knocking out songs like Cecilia and that were, and Bridge Over Troubled Water is a 100% pop album.
He's written more pop hits than just about anybody else in popular music.
Yeah.
And I heard about Dylan through Bowie, Robert Zimmerman, song for Bob Dylan.
Yeah, you
know.
went sideways, didn't you? From
So,
one
you know,
to
you
another?
do discover people. I mean, also Lou Reed I discovered through Bowie.
Yeah. It's easy to beat, you know, past generations of pop with a stick, which is apparently should happen. But people forget that pop wasn't the culture. It was a subculture, and it wasn't on adverts, etc., etc. Even the biggest and brightest of Bowie, it was a bit of a battle. It was, but I think that's half the attraction of it.
You had Sunday Night with the charts, which you would sit in with Radio 1. You had Smash Hits, for me. This is it. And you had Tops of Pops if you could get it. And then you had W.H. Smiths and Woolworths
We had
to go and
Jackie,
get.
Jackie, but as a boy, you weren't allowed to. You know, Jackie was like you borrowed it off your girlfriends because you really weren't allowed to buy Jackie.
Yeah.
Or My Guy. And
But there was, you know, there was Fab 208, etc., etc. All of those are
Many
gone.
of others.
And just putting, as I say, T-Rex up there because the greatest hits is legitimate in I think in pop. Equally, the compilation album. You know, you could get those super hits ones, and even though they're, you know, a bit naff and all of that, those 25 tracks aside, pop music is the only thing that allows you to just skip from one genre to another. So you go from Guys and Dolls, I don't know, into Whisper It, Gary Glitter, into something else, etc. Those compilation albums were absolutely legitimate.
I think that you all have a very different attitude and feeling for T-Rex than I do, because you all see kind of a great depth in it, and there's something there that isn't there for me, because for me that's just a party album.
Yeah,
that is something that you go boof.
I disagree. You have to listen. No, I disagree.
I don't think it's a great depth. It's half the idea. It's terrific fun. There was Mark Bolan, who had been a pillar of the underground, suddenly just said, you know what, I'm going to sing a wop bop a loo bop a lock bamboo. And he just turned it round.
I don't know, I think there was depth. I mean, Cosmic Dancer, what's it like to be a loon? I liken it to a balloon. I think there's great depth in T-Rex. I think you're absolutely wrong.
See, I wonder whether we have the same view. You feel like that about him as I do about Adamant, and it's probably because
I love Adamant as well. And in fact, I watched him play last year doing an acoustic version of You're So Physical, and it was like watching Mark Bolan.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, he is such a rock star.
Well, we're a heartbeat away from me telling my Mark Bolan shirt story again, so could we all calm down? Now, for something so seemingly shallow and throwaway, pop can really pack a punch, and often it's a wounding stiletto aimed straight at your teenage heart.
Billy Ray was a preacher's son, and when his daddy would visit, he'd come along.
I always wanted to marry Dusty Springfield, but I was only 9, and anyway, nature wasn't listening. In the 1960s and 70s, pop music may have gone through a seismic revolution, but love remained its engine. Love between the singer and their chosen object of desire, or best of all, between the singer and you. A 3-minute dirty secret. The sexual revolution meant songs got more risque, productions got lusher, more swelling with the strings, clearer harmonies. And weeping wasn't just for the girls. Roy Orbison, as sweet a vocalist as you'd hope to hear. We believed at the time he hid his tears behind those shades. Some performers could make love seem smooth, sultry, and for the younger fan, grown up. Producing herself for the first time, Diana Ross continued to leave us yearning with her second solo album, Touch Me in the Morning.
I can't live if living is without you.
Oh, and the heartbreak could be big, orchestra big, with swooping vocals and industrial strength anguish. Without You, arguably the first ever power ballad, was the emotional peak of Harry Nilsson's terrific Nilsson Schmilsson.
Talking to myself and feeling old.
Then there was the Carpenters' ethereal third album, so fragile, so rarefied, that it felt like love would simply blow away on a wind of heartbreak.
Nothing to do but frown. Rainy days and Mondays always get me down.
Sometimes you just want to belt up and play the records. I don't know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Grace, not suggesting for a second anyone's ever stood you up, dumped you, or sent you a Dear John Jeanette letter. But do you have a go-to heartbreak album, even if you want to make yourself feel sad?
Well, yes, definitely. But I would say that some of them are so effective, it's almost as if you have to ban yourself, because you don't want to... And that's the beauty of an album. You can be there for 10 tracks just, drinking the supermarket brand vodka and just pushing yourself to the limit. I would say Kate Bush. Anything by Kate Bush. The Hands of Love, possibly.
Is that because you literally remind you of a breakup, or you see, forcing the emotion I'm all for. I think affecting emotion is a terrific thing to do.
But sometimes an album can be a little bit like something. It's like bloodletting. You know that you can go there. There's stuff by Stevie Nicks, that I will go to, and I know that it will kind of provoke a reaction. But Kate Bush, I mean, even her kind of big pop singles, and the things that go through her albums, they're extraordinarily moving, deep themes about, losing someone, unrequited
love. It's a delicious world, isn't
making yourself kind of more beautiful for someone that doesn't want you anymore. These are all big, sad, considering she was like 16 when she was penning some of them.
Wonderful line in Love and Death by Annie Hall, which sums up that when, I think it's Diane Keaton delivers it, she says, I never want to get married, I just want to get divorced. there's that forcing of emotion. David, you strike me as not the most emotional man I ever met, but...
You'd be surprised. I think that pop albums were used as a way of kind of rehearsing emotions for yourself, you know what I mean? And so, if I could still go back to Scott Walker's first solo album and put it on, and I could go back into the mindset I had when I was 18, when something had gone wrong with a girl, and you listen to that record, and it was full of Jacques Brel songs and about my death and Jackie and Matilda and so forth, and you think, if only I could respond to romantic disappointments as magnificently as this character does, you know what I mean? And they were a way of learning bits about life.
Yeah.
And that was one of the ways you did them, because we didn't read romantic novels.
No,
I don't think we didn't go to see romantic films. It was largely through albums that we did that.
George, you ever have albums where you just thought, I wish I could feel about someone or someone felt about me like that?
Oh, no, I have no problem crying. And there are many, many songs from, you know, the beautiful ones by Prince. That's a big one if I'm really having a bad time. You know, is it him or is it me?
Yeah.
Sarah by Bob Dylan. You know, please forgive my unworthiness.
But see, sometimes I think as well, it doesn't even have to be, even though it's most delicious perhaps if you're thinking about some obscure object of desire, but Gilbert O'Sullivan, who has been, you know, resurrected and quite rightly, and his albums had, I mean, something like Alone Again Naturally, which deals with desolation, old age and death. And when you're 15 and hearing, looking back over the years, whatever else that appears, I remember I cried when my father died, never wishing to hide the tears. And at 65 years old, my mother, God rest her soul, couldn't understand why the only man she had ever loved had been taken, leaving her to start with a heart so badly broken, despite encouragement from me, no words were ever spoken. And when she passed away, I cried and cried all day, alone again, naturally. I'm 14 and I'm hearing that, and now I'm actually I'm seeing myself 14 and thinking, wow, that is that pop music or is that poetry or is that just genius?
It's also the fact that these things are imprinted on you because you've listened to them so many times. So when something comes on in your life,
getting out of that,
it unlocks it.
This jilted and all.
You learn it first, and then you understand it years later.
It's good to know, isn't it?
Well, there's there's a set of albums in my house that I love, but I cannot go to. Things like, you know, I do not want What I Haven't Got by Sinead O'Connor, Little Earthquakes by Tori Amos.
Why can't you go to them?
Because they remind me of a time when, stuff by Suzanne Vega from when I was 14, and I think I was going out with somebody and he probably said he didn't want to see me anymore because he didn't want a relationship. Then I saw him with Julie Aragon. And I was like...
As someone who, and forgive the cliche, as someone who pulls no punches and makes, a good epithet and waspish, it's something about when you see even a casual remark in a Sunday supplement, bad-mouthing a record you really love. Nothing is a call to arms more than that. And if you suddenly saw a piece by me saying, what a waste of time Tori Amos is, nothing makes you, even beyond, for me, football or anything else, I go into battle.
One of the worst things you can say as a writer that will rile people up is to take something that they love and say, you only like that because it's cool. People go mad. I know. People, you're going to get green
take on love as well, like Last Night I Dreamt Somebody Loved Me. If a 10-ton truck kills the both of us. That also really speaks to me, when I'm kind of feeling sad.
Said, I think even as...
The Queen is Dead is just this whole album and anthem to loneliness, public loneliness, isn't it?
But the music itself, we're dealing with the lyrics, and just when that piece earlier on came on of Wee Small Hours by Sinatra, just that little glockenspiel and violins, that somehow is a deep, speaking to deep. You just think, I'm in a great mood, but I'm willing to just indulge myself in this. There's something in the actual series of notes, of course, that's, especially in pop, they can do it in 3 minutes and say, I'm going to break your heart before this is over, even though it's a lovely sunny day in New York, I'm writing this.
Do you not worry about the neighbours, that they can hear, that they know that it's that album that you've got out? Again, I once lived beside someone who would always play an Elkie Brooks album at about 11:30 at night. I would suddenly hear him singing along to No More the Fool, and I was like, oh, God, mate, she's not coming back.
Well, I've got to tell you, one of the most successful phone-ins I've ever done on the radio was asking people to call in on the subject, my neighbours apparently only have one record, and there is plenty in there. I'm going to lighten it up now, and sometimes with pop music, you can't see the wood for the trees, and you take things for granted, and until, you get a few years under the belt, and you think, wow. And some people can just put out pop album after pop album after pop album, but because it's pop, it's overlooked. And one of those people is Elton John. People think, silly old Elton, but an album like this is faultless. It is absolutely beautiful. Even the stuff that could have been released as singles and weren't, it's almost of a single piece. It's got hits on it, it's got tunes on it, it's got brilliant arrangements. Elton John's Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, from a period when he was selling 2% of all records in the world. That's a fact.
Can you remember how he unveiled that record?
Did he unveil it?
He played the whole thing in sequence at Wembley Stadium, and I was there.
Was you? Nothing makes my heart sink like when somebody says, and now I'm going to play some new songs. Unlike other forms of album, pop is not allowed to intrigue, suggest or grow on you. It has to be immediate, finished and fully formed from the word go. Pop is a fantastic, insistent, glittering salesman, and what it's selling you is your own life. Great pop touches everyone, and those that it doesn't should be thrashed with a rolled-up copy of smash hits. Great pop can't be planned either. It's just down to some crazed alchemy. Just the sight of that album cover, or a few bars of, I don't know, track 4, side 2, can take you to some magnificent moment in time. Some say such majesty as this is melodramatic, but these people have pea-sized souls. Just listen to Art's voice. That's not normal. Suddenly, it's 1970 again, 60s folk is but a memory, and Simon and Garfunkel have consecrated a new cathedral in sound. Thanks, Melody Maker. Then there's reggae. In the 60s, Trojan Records' Tighten Up compilations saw a generation swing a non-stop stay-pressed leg. By 1977, reggae too had grown up, got roots. Bob Marley became an international star on the back of Exodus. Roots reggae as pop music, as Proustian Rush. Sometimes, though, you just want to escape with a pop narcotic, an album that will offer you an instantaneous, fleeting pop high. And the pop audience remains insatiable. Few of those who can keep the hits a coming, like ABBA, Benny, Beyond, Agneta and Meryl. The album, The Rival. Money, 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 Knowing Me, Knowing You, Dancing Queen. That is a song cycle. Blondie's Parallel Lines. So called because it drives along like some shining bulletproof locomotive from the moment the needle hits the groove. The more I think about it and the more I see of it, it is, to quote The Sound of Music, like trying to nail a wave upon the sand. Pop music, you can hear reggae there, you can hear the Bridge Over Troubled Water, you got your Blondie, you got ABBA, all of the what otherwise would be different genres coming together to agree they're pop music. So is it tied to a time? Would you say certain pop songs are tied to a time? They can be evocative, but are they timeless?
I think they are timeless, yes. I find as I you know, I'm going back and playing records that I may have bought 40 years earlier. I'm more likely to play again the thing that I bought because the record was on the radio than the thing that I bought because it was the cool thing to do. My mates were buying it. I'm more likely to play Blondie than I am to play 10 years after Stonehenge, you know what I mean?
I understand exactly what you mean.
You know, because those things, you know, tunes, lyrics, those are the things that are timeless. You know, these people deserve far more respect than they get.
They do. Yeah, that's George's, the person who has actually written hit records. You're never going to get respect for a pop album because it's just a pop album. As an artist, do you want to be taken seriously, and do you find your music is particularly evocative for people of an era just?
Absolutely, and I think it's taken me a long time to realise what I meant, what we meant to people, you know.
Yeah.
When you're in the thick of it, you take a lot of it for granted, but over the years, as I've travelled around the world to places I couldn't go to in the 80s, like Argentina, places in South America where I wasn't allowed in, Russia,
right,
where I wasn't allowed to go.
Oh.
Suddenly people come out with saying, you know, you changed my life, you helped me to come out, you know, transsexuals coming up to me and saying thank you. I'm like, what did I do? Just by being myself, you know.
Let me ask you this, Jill. As someone who had, of course, you know, regular on Top of the Pops and the joy of seeing a #1 record around the world, did you actually want to make pop albums? Were you quite happy doing singles? Did you have anything to say by saying, here's a pop album?
I think when I started in music, I just wanted to be Bowie. You know, I had this idea of myself as kind of dangerously weird, on the edge, lock up your sons. And then I started this band with 3 other people, and they changed. We were a goth band. We were like doing goth.
Were you?
Yeah, we had this song about dying amid applause, you know, and all this kind of. And we originally called In Praise of Lemmings. That was the first.
You?
Yeah, that was the first name. And John Moss came along and went, John Moss came along and went, nah, no one's going to like that.
Let's sell
then
a
we
few
were called the
records.
Sex Gang Children.
Yeah.
And John said, no one's going to buy a record by the Sex Gang Children. So I gave it to my mate Andy, and they became the Sex Gang Children, and we became Culture Club. And it was just... whatever intentions you start out with, you know, they can be the best in the world, but they get changed.
And just looking at that as well, when, you know, again, forgive me if people say, oh, the 80s, you know, Culture Club in the 80s, you weren't, of course, aware, oh, here I am making an 80s album.
Oh, no.
You didn't, you know.
And I have to say, when people come up and say, you're from my era, I say, no, I'm still here. You are as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I you know, I have a lot of kind of respect for the past, but I'm not someone who's interested in wallowing in the past. You know, I think the past is great, but it's over.
And yeah, it would be hypocritical if you went to see one of your favourite artists if they didn't play the albums from a year ago.
I always play the old songs, always have.
Yeah.
You know,
People want
always have. You know, you always have to be careful not to kind of torture people with, you know, you've got to place things properly when you do a show.
Sure.
Because when I go and see Prince, I want to hear things I know. When I see Bowie, I want to hear things I know. So I understand how it works, you know.
Grace, how much then is, you know, remembrance of things past, as they say, in an album? Is it a hard sell if you try to say to somebody, this is a great album, but they haven't got the context of it?
Do you know, I think it perhaps is. Well, especially if something really means something to you. I mean, it's something like The Queen is Dead by the Smiths, which to me is me, 13 years old, sitting in a back bedroom and suddenly having this kind of beautiful slice of another Northwest weirdo talking about feeling like an outsider and being unsuccessul at making wonderful relationships with, well, men, women. What was Morrissey doing then? However, I think if you give it to somebody now, they would just go, it's just the Smiths. You know, if they didn't know the Smiths, that's just another slice of their misery if they weren't into it. But, you know, there's something that was very much of that time, that kind of him popping up on top of the pops and, you know.
But I think the Smiths are... I'm a huge Morrissey fan and a Smiths fan, and I think the Smiths really divide people. I mean, my musician friends, I have rows with them because they say, oh, well, it's not melodic and it's not intelligent. I'm like, I mean, I just, you know, it's just one of those groups that, like, literally you will fight with people over. It's rubbish. Like, how can you say it's not? It's so genius. It's so clever.
David, if you've got, as I say, this context thing, because especially now where music has exploded and become, it's all, you know, to some extent worthless, is the context absolutely crucial? If you're going to say to someone, this is a great album, they may say, well, come off it, Grandad.
No, I think that stuff lives. I got a reminder of this, the closing ceremony of the Olympics, when The Who turned up and did Barbara O'Reilly.
Yeah.
And I thought, why are they doing a track that was never known as a hit single or whatever? And of course, people told me it was because it's widely used on American TV shows, you know what I mean? And so this music nowadays, and this must apply to George's music as well, just lives forever. It's going round and round.
Yeah.
And so a 16-year-old nowadays listening to George's record doesn't place it in the 1980s. It could be now, or it could be the 1960s. They've no idea at all.
But I think trying to sell the concept of listening to an album to a 16-year-old, it is quite difficult anyway. I think that younger people now, they are used to kind of two singles and being a bit shortchanged, you know. So
it's a remote control generation.
Well,
Pop is synonymous with the new. Tomorrow's sound right now is the message. More often than not, though, it's just last year's model with a new wig and a hairspray. Sometimes, though, something genuinely, shockingly new appears, as if you never knew pop at all. Every now and then, a pop act comes along and you think, hold on, where has this come from? Despite being inherently mainstream, sometimes the forces of pop conservatism takes 40 winks, and that's when the left-field loonies storm the barricades. They get swept up in the moment and allowed at last the attention their talent actually deserves. And if you have a wonky worldview or live in a parallel universe, you need space to stretch out. You need an album.
Girl on the run around, got me all around town.
Reaching beyond glam and smuggling in bits from what we can still call krautrock, Roxy Music's debut album, released in 1972, was utterly original. And by taking their underground proto-electro-explosiono overground, they offered us something blindingly new. Yeah, it was pop, but not like anyone had known it.
Wand, weiße Streifen, grüner Rand.
Kraftwerk have a name for this. It's machine music. This is Autobahn, based, say the group, on the rhythm of trucks, cars and passing bridges heard while driving through Germany.
It was the Tomorrow's World programme who first introduced us to what appeared to be a group of accountants fiddling with synthesizers and trying to recreate the impression of a journey on a German motorway. Everyone loved it, and in 1974, Kraftwerk's Autobahn album sped ahead to leave everyone else stuck on the pop hard shoulder. Kate Bush's 1980 album Never Forever opened with a multi-octave song, A Wife's Paranoia, then moved on to a tribute to a turn-of-the-century composer, and ended with a song about a fetus worried about a nuclear war. It went straight to #1, and it was the first album by a female solo artist ever to enter the charts right at the top. Like they say, just give them what they want when they don't know they want it. One or two still surprising looks in there. Now, obviously, Bowie's a given, but has anybody else, and away from, if I can, away from like what it meant to you personally and sexually and all of that, are you continually surprised in pop? Do people arrive and think, wow, that's new? Is it possible that something should still leave you thinking, wow?
I think it's different now. I think, these days, it's whether the kind of music excites me and whether it feels real and, because a lot of pop music today feels like it's really been kind of designed and really thought about. And I think some people still make it look effortless. Although I can't think of any particular one. I don't know.
Points at his own chest.
I just feel like, I don't know. It's just whether you believe the person. I think that's...
Then looking at it from the other end of the telescope, when we could also, of course, you could say Roxy Music and Kate Bush and all these people arrived and went, wow, where does that come from? Can that happen again? Have we exhausted the seam?
No, I think it does happen all the time. I think there are great records being made all the time, but I think you have to look harder now. I think, the mainstream is very formulaic now.
Yeah.
Everyone sounds like someone else, or this is the new this person, and the other person's only been around 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's the new, Ellie Goulding or the new this. And I think, the internet is really the great place to find new things, and you have to rely on... It never seems
very visual, though. It just don't seem like, that physical thing. And I know it sounds romantic and nostalgic, but the physical thing, the commitment to actually getting on a bus, going to, remember, record shops, getting something, taking it home, and then sitting indoors, as you were saying earlier on, it's that commitment. Grace, what was the shock of the new for you? The very first time you thought, wow, what is that? Or does it happen repeatedly?
It happens repeatedly, but I can still remember the first time I set eyes on you. The sign of a good experience like that is when it almost causes a violent reaction in your living room, because you've got the generations watching together actually becoming angry at each other because one person's loving it and the other person's asking too many questions and someone's finding it, kind of morally wrong, and it's all kind of kicking off. And so,
just on that, George, so when you were your most extreme, or even when you first came on it, was it disheartening to find everyone who bought your albums and stuff dressed exactly the same as you? That's not quite the point, is it?
No, what was interesting was when we got on Top of the Pops, we got on Top of the Pops by accident. We were too low to be eligible for Top of the Pops, and I think Shakin' Stevens was ill, so we got his slot. Thank you, Shaky. And the reaction from the industry, all the interviews that we'd had set up, all pulled out. They all said, we're not having that on the telly. What was it?
Yeah.
What was that? But people loved us. And the difference when I went out on the street, I went into a department store and got mobbed by all housewives. And it was like, people liked me, but the industry was like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And there was a thing in the paper saying, is it a bird, is it a plane? Wally of the week, I got all sorts of, but people loved us, so...
David, as an editor of smash hits, just, as influential as it is, how much were you trying to push new sensations all the time? And were you ever affected by a new sensation?
Well, you used to look at people and think, I hope this happens, because this will be really exciting if it happens. And George was one case.
Yeah.
Human League were another case, because you thought, there's not just a sound here, there's a look, there's a world view, There's a personality that comes with it, which as a magazine editor, you're looking for absolutely all the time. And there was that kind of Thursday night theatre of Top of the Pops, where the nation changed its mind in 10 minutes. And that activity was changed on Friday and Saturday as a consequence. You can't have that anymore.
No, do you think then we, the British, are better at it than the Americans, actually throwing news genres and sensations out there? We seem to be more willing to be shocked.
We play with things, don't we?
Yeah.
We toy with things. We like costumes. We like funny voices. It's all part of our tradition. So we take to things very readily.
Are undeniably great. I remember seeing Suede's first appearance on Top of the Pops, and I was an artist myself, and I just remember thinking, this is amazing and exciting, and I totally got it straight away. I didn't have to be convinced. There was just something about it that was just very now and kind of made me feel a bit old-fashioned, actually.
And also very flexible, because we're looking there, saying whether it's Roxy Music and, of course, Bowie, and we're seeing Kate Bush. But the perception is that that's then what you were into. But you just slotted in alongside all the other albums in your collection. You didn't necessarily...
You can jump from punk to Kraftwerk. That's what a real pop fan does.
Yeah.
You're always willing to... There are things that you live and die by. There are things that you'll never let go of because they're part of who you are. But there's also, if you're a good pop fan, you're always open to, what's this over here? Like Acid House.
Yeah.
Good example.
Exactly,
when that happened, I was like, I want some of this.
Yeah.
Can I just throw in one thing that very often gets forgotten when you talk about albums, particularly in the days of vinyl? That they existed in the public space. You took them around with you. You carried them in order to attract the envy and excitement of your peers and to say, I'm this kind of person now.
The hottest boys at school would have like a kind of an Our Price bag, and then you go, what's in the Our Price bag?
And if you're really good, you could read through the plastic and you could see what it was.
Well, I'm going to go to my third selection for the Wall of Fame, and it comes out of the shock of the new, because... pretty much nothing shocked everyone more than punk rock when it turned up in 1976, and yet it was born out of the cartoon pop and genius pop, and a group who never, ever really got their due. Of course, the Ramones, a pop album that just, Surfing Bird, Cretin Hop, and of course it's had their only real hit, Sheena is a Punk Rocker, on it. It may sound like a guitar album, but this is as good pop writing, economical and brilliant as you'll find. And the Ramones rocket to Russia for all they did for us and all they never got at the time. Most successful pop acts have only one sound, which we're all happy for them to hammer into the ground. But the truly great artists like to keep things fresh by radical reinvention, and good for them. Doing something different is the beating heart of all art, most of the time.
Wake me up before you go.
We first fell in love with pop stars because they played mainstream pop. But then they and we grew up. They matured and wanted to become artists, no longer constrained by disposable 3-minute puppy love songs. They wanted to go their own way, to be unchained from the forces of commercial repression. And that. What pop star didn't want 40 minutes of album time to mess about reinventing themselves? After leaving Motown, Michael Jackson was determined to redefine his solo career. And his 1979 album, Off the Wall, created by Jackson and producer Quincy Jones, was a jaw-dropping game-changer. From there, it was but a short moonwalk to its successor, Thriller, and 50 million album sales, and a silly but justified new title, The King of Pop.
Well, I guess it would be nice.
Following his breakout 1987 album Faith, George Michael set out to do a reverse Jackson. The album had spawned 6 singles, including the fruity I Want Your Sex, but George still felt he wasn't being taken seriously. Cue his po-faced follow-up, Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1, and all that could be heard was the sound of furrowed brows and tumbleweed. We're still waiting for Volume 2.
Just look through your window. Look who sits outside.
But the indisputable dame of reinvention will always be Bowie. From glam rocker to Germanic electronics boffin to Philly soul boy and beyond, Bowie has raided the style wardrobe with gay abandon over and over again, and nearly always it has worked fabulously. Fleetwood Mac have often had their reinventions forced upon them. No group has had to juggle fame, fortune and obscurity quite so cleverly as they, but it was their 1977 album Rumours where they discovered pop perfection, not to mention worldwide sales of 40 million copies. Of course, hubris took its toll after that, and the follow-up, Tusk, the double album, Natch, saw the whole thing get a bit boss-eyed.
Just tell me that you want me.
Grace, do we want pop stars to be real people and even whisper it artists and change in that? Is that a good thing?
Do we want them to be real people?
Real people,
no,
yeah.
No, I don't want them to be real people. I don't want...
No.
I mean, that was what was so beautiful about, like, the 80s, which was my era of pop, that we didn't get to see them being real people, so they became these huge stars. You know, you didn't get to see them. You know, there wasn't the internet. There wasn't the Daily Mail constantly refreshing internet coverage of them putting their bin out and scratching their bum in Tesco's. You didn't see that, did you?
And did you want, you know, your favourite bands to do an unplugged album or do something different?
No, I don't want any of my favourite bands to ever do unplugged.
Totally agree.
No, I don't. But I mean, you know, talking about George in the 80s, I just assumed that he just sat on a pile of gold all day while people fitted him with beautiful shoes. And,
Not far wrong.
That's what he did. I don't want to think that, you know, George got a gas bill at any point.
No.
And
I can let you know that I still don't deal with those things.
There you go. Thank you.
But musically, did you ever want... I was quite happy for people to make the same album. I'm quite happy to.
I disagree. I think as an artist, you know, look at someone like Bowie. Every album, when I was a kid, every album was like, what's he done now? And to start with, I never liked anything. Like, the first time I bought Station to Station, it was like, oh, what's he doing now? Diamond Dogs, you know, Low. And then within a, 24-hour space, it would be my favourite record ever.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, in a way, Bowie was probably one of the last artists that did that. You know?
You're right, because they're few and far between people who can do that and know what they're doing.
And I mean, I've seen Bowie do, you know, acoustic gigs. Oh, my God, any form of Bowie or any form of my favourite artist, stripped down, rocked up, I don't care. You know, it's all great.
David, are you in favour of people doing new things?
I've got no problem with them doing new things as long as they're good.
That's the trick. That's the trick, isn't it?
In the end, I'm sorry, strip all this away. It's can you come up with the tunes?
Yeah.
You know, and some people do come up with the tunes while totally changing their lineup, their image and everything. And some people, Bruce Springsteen being a case, sort of makes the same record again and again, but it's not as good, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, so I don't mind people changing if it gives them inspiration and it reawakens some kind of spark within them.
I don't like it when an artist tries to be trendy.
There is that, yes, there is that.
I didn't really... There's some Bowie records, like some remixes that I didn't like. You know, I like it. What I like about the new Bowie record is it's Bowie.
Yeah.
It's not anyone, you know, it's Bowie with Visconti. It's not trying to be anything but what it is. And I think there's a point with every artist where you have to just be yourself and do it well.
I think the one thing we've overlooked as well with particularly the pop album is distinct from any other genre of album. It's not necessary for the person even to write the songs. In fact, for a long time, it worked better when they didn't. And then in the 70s, you've got to do your own material. But a lot of the songs we've heard tonight, Rainy Days and Mondays, etc., they weren't written. They were written by people we can't even conjure up the names now. We could if we wanted to. And I think that might have got lost. The great, what they call tunesmiths, songsmiths, the tin pan.
Well, they're around now. They're around now, but they're very formulaic.
They're mechanics.
It's really mechanical. And I think, you know, we live in a kind of age where there's a distinct lack of melody around, I think.
Yeah.
We need that back.
You get that back. But I've got to say, I edge towards Grace here. I like my artists to be good and reliable and predictable. I do. I don't get shocked. Right, here's the real fun part of the evening where we've asked our guests to bring along 3 albums which for them define the very word pop in album form. Grace, what have you brought?
Oh, yes. OK, I brought... Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. I must have listened to this album about 1,000 times, especially in the 90s. I was doing my dissertation in Scotland on Virginia Woolf. This was the perfect backing track. Yeah, it sent me a little bit off the edge.
All right, Kate Bush, solid pop album.
Just wonderful and very, very deep and you know, the Hatfield Hollow, the Smiths. Love The Queen Is Dead, but... and I think this is probably more... If you weren't a Smiths fan and you were given this first, I think you'd find this one a little bit more challenging because it's just utterly miserable with no pickup at any point. But, you know, that's what I love about them.
All right.
Also, you know, things that really pushed the buttons of people and annoyed them. I love pop that aggravates people so much that some people just want to ring the police. You know, what is he saying? I want to report somebody.
I may, of course, reach for the butterfly net and chase you down. Sisters of Mercy.
I'm having this.
All right.
No one.
That's fine, go on.
I'll let you into a secret. I used to be a goth.
Yeah. I know. Okay.
You know, I haven't changed that much now. I'll stretch to a navy blue dress at the moment, but I haven't stretched. I absolutely love this album, and I still put it on in the house. Again, relentlessly miserable, almost panto miserable, but fantastic. I mean, whenever I listen to this, I'll go on Twitter and I just announce I'm listening to it, and it's like a dog whistle for like every old goth across Britain, nay, the world, to just kind of to remember the times they hung around the town hall steps.
We're a long way from how much is that doggy in the window, aren't we? George, what three have you brought with you?
Okay, I've bought Hunky Dory.
Of course.
Because I think it's probably the most kind of interesting avant-garde Bowie album.
Should pop be interesting and avant-garde?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the sleeve, the Greta Garbo, everything about it. And as I said, it introduced me to Bob Dylan because of the song for Bob Dylan. So, yeah, amazing album. And I still play this.
Of course,
all
tune
the time,
after tune after
all the
tune.
time.
Yeah.
T-Rex tanks.
Okay.
I just remember the controversy about this picture of him sitting on the little tank. And I remember, I think this originally came with a big pull-out poster, which was on the wall. Again, you know, massive Mark Bolan fan. This is, I think, a stellar album.
It is.
It still stands up.
Sonic album.
And then Desire, Bob Dylan. This was like a real turning point for me, hearing the song Hurricane and finding out that you could actually write really intellectual songs about things, you know, because Bowie and T-Rex was all quite sort of nebulous and, you know, fantastical. This was real life stuff.
Yeah. And, of course, it's one of the few albums that includes the word kelp.
Absolutely.
It has the word kelp on it.
And one of my favourite songs on here is Sarah, which is just so...
I can still hear the sound of those Methodist bells.
Absolutely, just a very, very clever love song, a brilliant album.
Well, I think Bob Dylan would be flattered to know he's still a pop artist as opposed to some statue.
Beautiful.
David, what have you got?
Well, this is pretty obvious. Beatles' Hard Day's Night, 1964. The first album they made where they wrote all the songs.
Yep. It is faultless, and I was hoping to call this series Betting Without the Beatles, because I think that might overwhelm everything. But you know, the first side were songs for the movie, and then they had to fill the second side, so they came up with 6 unbelievable songs, none of which they put out as singles. Yeah.
So every British band who's gone in the studio ever since has been trying to match Hard Day's Night.
Can't do it.
You can't be done. Paul Simon, There Goes Rhyming Simon, his second solo album. I think he's in a really interesting case because he's an unlovable pop star. He's unique in that nobody likes Paul Simon. Nobody wants to be Paul Simon. Nobody dreams about Paul Simon. But by God, Paul Simon is good. Yeah. And the older I get, the more I realise how good he is. And finally...
All right.
Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark.
Now, George was hitting that.
George also keen on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I'm glad to see. You know, I started playing it last week. I played it 10 times in a row. You know, I've had this record since 1974, and I thought, well, does it fit a pop category? OK, it's supported by a light jazz group. All the tracks are 4 minutes long, and the whole record is about waiting for a bloke. How much more pop could you possibly get?
And it does include the line, of course, stoking the star-making machinery behind the popular song.
And she hates that record.
Does she? Well...
she's wrong and we're right.
She's wrong. Right, controversial old bag. Right, well, you know, corny though it is, I'm allowed a baker's dozen doing the 13 here. I think it comes with the title of the show. And I think we'd be remiss in our duty if we didn't say, yes, this is all interesting takes on pop, but one thing really is it, and the world has voted on that. Off the wall, Michael Jackson, absolutely. I mean, there's not a bit of spare production or tunesmithery on this. Off the wall, Michael Jackson, possibly the greatest pop album ever made. And now we're complete. There they are, 13 solid sonic blocks in our wall of sound. Thank you very much, Grace Dent, for helping us build it. Some heavy lifting there from Boy George, for once, and the mighty intellect of our own David Hepworth. There you go, everyone. Thank you very much. I think we've given the X Factor generation something to suck on. We might have even given Simon Cowell himself a bloody nose by discussion alone. I do hope you enjoyed it, and more importantly, experienced just a whiff of what it was like to be 15 all over again. Thank you very much. Good night.
Trying to choose a world with an LP's worth of tunes. Choose a world with an LP's worth of tunes. the heart of it that's simply awful. A man who makes a living off a plastic waffle. There's something at the heart of it that's simply awful. A man who makes a living off a plastic waffle. There's something at the heart of it that's simply awful. A man who makes a living off a plastic waffle. Trying to make a living off an